attendees coming in, which is lovely. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Emma Desi, my YouTube channel. It's great to have you here. And I have the lovely Brooke Warner in to chat today about hybrid publishing. Which is lovely. Welcome, everybody. Welcome. I'm not having a good start to this, am I? There we go. At least we know we are live. So welcome, everybody. We've got the lovely Brooke here, who is the owner and founder of She Writes Press. And the reason we are here, hi, Casey, good to see you. Hi, Lisa. We've got some lovely people coming in today. So that's great. So great to have you all here. Thanks for joining us. And if you are in my audience, you will have seen me talking about this book a lot and mentioning it a lot. Launchpad, the countdown to publishing your book, which is the sequel to Countdown, the Launchpad to writing your book. This was a particularly interesting read for me. I've discovered there's lots of things about the publishing industry as a whole that was new. So some of which I was familiar with and some of which I was a little bit more unfamiliar with. And so I thought it was a great idea to come in and chat about this today. And I'm really, really excited to talk about hybrid publishing because, Brooke, I think this is a relatively sort of new sphere. I mean, I know the new face of publishing is new anyway, but I think hybrid is even newer. But before we delve into it, I wonder, would you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your own journey to writing, and then your own journey to She Writes Press?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here. Hi, everybody. My journey to writing is really more my journey through publishing. To then end up writing a couple books, and I write a lot about writing and publishing, but my career has always been in book publishing. So I started in book publishing in 2000 as a young editor and have worked all that time, these past 23 years in book publishing, and then was in traditional publishing for 13 years before starting She Writes Press in 2012. Trying to remember. So we're just a little more than 10 years old at this point. And I mean, the story of starting She Writes Press is really one of disillusionment with the traditional space. I had been there, like I said, for 13 years, and lots about it was wonderful, but lots about it also was very challenging. And some of the things that were particularly challenging had to do with the focus of acquisitions being on author brand and author celebrity. And I think that, the more people that are interested in publishing, which of course many, many more people are, and the doors are open to more people to publish because of self-publishing and other ways of getting published, I just saw a need for supporting authors in a way that would allow a publishing experience that felt a lot like a traditional experience, but that wouldn't have all the barriers to entry that exist for traditional publishers. And so that was the concept behind She Writes Press from the beginning. And hybrid, it wasn't exactly born with us. It was around, I think, before She Writes Press. But I think I'm one of the publishers who, in the early days really started talking openly about what hybrid was, and what its merits are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Oh, it's great to hear you've got that real kind of both sides of the coin, if you like, being kind of in big in-house for the very traditional space, and then I think the real bravery to go ahead and do something new that hasn't been seen before or was only just emerging. But I wanted to take you back a little bit and ask you, what was it that interested you in publishing? What was it that drew you to the industry in the first place?
Oh gosh, that is taking me back a bit. I really liked books, and I graduated with a degree in international relations and didn't particularly know what I was going to do with that degree. And it was actually my mom asked me, I was 22 years old, what do you love? And I was like, well, I love books and I love reading. And she was like, well, that's a career. And so I just looked into the possibility of working for a book publisher, and it turned out to suit me quite well. I just got lucky.
Yeah. Someone's just commented there. What a great mom. Indeed.
She is a great mom. Yes.
So She Writes Press. Tell us a little bit about it, and because what kind of books do you represent? How do you find the talent that you want to represent, given that you're doing your very best to sort of lower that barrier to entry and make it a lot more egalitarian.
Yeah, so our submissions process is pretty straightforward. It is a 2-tiered submissions process. So we have one group of readers who reads the first submission and comes in and puts it either saying, yes, it's moving ahead to She Writes, or actually we're recommending coaching or more work. So that's the first tier. And then if it moves ahead to She Writes, then we review it internally. And that's a place where we talk about the book and, sometimes about the author, but really we're focused primarily on the story in the book and whether or not it's a fit for us and how strong the writing is. And even at that point, we might say it needs more editorial work, but we give authors a pretty strong assessment of their work. And so even if authors decide that we're not a right fit for them or that they don't want to publish with us for any reason, we're giving them a lot of thorough feedback, which is a really important aspect to that process for me, because when I worked in traditional publishing, one of the things that was always difficult for authors, and I heard this feedback, was that they would just get essentially a form letter, someone saying you're not right for us, but no indication as to what was going on, why. So we've been efforting from the beginning to give authors a stronger sense of feedback, whether their book is right for us, if not, why. We try to be comprehensive in that feedback. So that's a submissions process. And in terms of looking for projects, I think we've just had a great luxury to not have to do a whole lot of promotion. I always say our authors are our ambassadors. And I had built this publishing company on a pre-existing platform, which was shewrites.com, which is not as active as it was 10 years ago. But we kind of came into a space where there was already a community of women writers. And I think we've we've worked hard for it, but it's also a luxury to have a strong reputation and good success, which has just led more authors to us over the years.
Yeah, well, that's lovely. Word of mouth for your books and for a publisher is just the best.
Yeah, definitely.
Really, yeah. And that is amazing that you're able to give such lovely, thorough feedback to the people who are submitting to you, because I know that's what every particularly debut authors want. That's what every author is looking for, is someone who can give them feedback and know whether they're on the right track, what are they doing well, where do they need to improve. So that's a real investment you're making of time as much as anything into possible future writers. So those writers that perhaps you say, okay, it's not quite ready yet, we recommend you do this, this, and this. Do they get an opportunity to resubmit to you after that? Or that felt important to me as well. And so we do give them that opportunity, and some of them might go work on their own and come back at a future date. And we charge a nominal fee for submissions because it takes a lot of time. I mean, we're not even breaking even on those assessments, in the sense that we read 50 pages and give a very thorough amount of feedback for, I think it's like $35. But if someone wants to come back after having previously submitted, we waive that fee. So it's saying, you've already submitted to us and we're happy to look at your submission again. So that's part of the process. That's a very good, that's very affordable. Yay. And just on that submission process, that would be just exactly as somebody who is applying to an agent, there would be the same pitch package you're putting together with the letter, the synopsis, possibly the first 3 chapters. Is that right?
We just ask for the 50 pages. I mean, some people do submit a proposal, but it's not something that's required for us. And that was based on the idea that if you shop around traditionally, you're usually asked to send your query letter plus 50 pages. If you have a novel, if you have a nonfiction book, you're really supposed to do a book proposal. But our entire premise for being is that we're not acquiring based on author platform. That's always been very important to me, because one of the things that happened when I spent 9 years at Seal Press was that I was rejecting books that I thought were phenomenal solely based on marketing decisions. And so that's what my TEDx talk is about. It's why I left the industry. And so one of our driving forces is you do not need to be already famous. You don't have to have an author platform. But it is solely about the merit of your book. And so a lot of the book proposal, which is totally valuable, by the way, for any author who wants to publish traditionally, I'm a big believer in book proposals. I help authors ghostwrite book proposals. I actually love book proposals. However, its purpose is to convince a publisher as to why you're a person that they should publish. And it's all about the marketing. Right. And so for us, that's not what we're focused on. We're focused on the writing. And so I feel that it's much more important that we just read those first 50 pages and assess the writing on the writing.
Oh, that'll be music to so many people's ears, I'm sure. I think you've brought up a really good point there. I think just for anyone who's watching or listening about who does want to go the traditional route. And I think it's really important for people to understand it's not all, a rejection is not always based on the quality of the work, but sometimes it's about what's in the zeitgeist. It's about what's trending at the moment.
100%. I mean, I think that's a really important thing to understand. And lots of times the rejections are solely based on lack of author platform. And then it's a catch-22 for authors, because the thing that helps you build a platform is a book. And so it's like, well, how do I get the book if I don't have a big enough platform? And you're telling me build a platform and I need the book, so it's very confusing for authors, I think, sometimes. And it's a reality of the industry. And so navigating that can be complicated for authors, which is why I think it's exciting that we have this indie space where authors are able to greenlight their own work and to, really honor the fact that they know their work is good. And I wouldn't take a rejection from a traditional publisher as necessarily saying anything about the merit of your work.
Oh, thank you for saying that. So you have thankfully written a chapter about hybrid publishing in the Countdown to Publishing Your Novel, which I'm really pleased about, because one of the things that you have mentioned in the top of the chapter is that there are a lot of players now within that hybrid space. And again, this can also be confusing for authors who are just sort of emerging, just coming into publishing. And adding to that, you mentioned that there are some bad actors as well. So that's a reason I do think that this is such a valuable addition to the book. I wonder if you could just help us feel a little bit more confident if we wanted to approach a hybrid noveler, hybrid publisher, and just to ask you, what's expected of the publisher, and also what's expected of the author with this scenario.
Yeah, so I think it's incumbent on the author to do their research, to know who's out there. I think once you decide that you want to work with a hybrid publisher, what's important to understand is that you will be fronting money, and that will look different depending on who the hybrid publisher is. And the costs vary quite a bit. But given that, you want to spend time and due diligence looking at the books, talking to the publisher's author base. I would talk to at least 3 or more published authors, from among the authors that publisher has actually brought all the way to publication. So importantly, you can see a lot just by the quality of the books themselves, and spend time on the website. I talk to every single author who gets onboarded onto She Writes Press. And I think that's an important piece too, because a lot of these bad actors, some of them are bad actors, some of them are just service providers, like there's Author Solutions, for instance, is just a giant machine, it's a mill, and they will publish your book. And some people have bad experiences and some people have good experiences, but a lot of the sales force is outsourced, because they're publishing like thousands of books a year, and you're not just going to get the individual kind of attention that you might want. And so I think it's very important to understand what kind of experience do you want? How much do you think that is worth? And what are you getting for that experience? So we're very clear about what services we provide. And the reason that we differentiate ourselves from a service provider, because we are providing services, but we're also a publisher. And the thing that qualifies us as a publisher is that we have traditional distribution, a sales force, and it's not the author just saying, please execute this. We're saying we're originating the covers. We're standing behind every single product that goes out into the world. We have strong editorial standards. So I think it's hugely important, especially with hybrid, that you get a sense of how strong are the standards of that hybrid publisher. But you can't sit there as an author and say, okay, well, this particular company has to, meet my measures. You have to figure out, like, do they? Because there are people out there who are going to misrepresent themselves. There are companies that call themselves hybrid that are not. As I said, you mentioned, because I wrote about it, there are bad actors out there. So it is confusing. And that's why I always say to authors, I think the best people to talk to are other authors. And I think it's why I said earlier that I don't particularly have to advertise, because our authors have had largely good experiences. And if you talk to, 3 authors out of 5 and half or more have had negative experiences, you might just want to take a second look at whether that's going to be a good fit for you. And I will say also that the IBPA, the Independent Book Publishers Association, has a checklist for hybrid publishing that can help you, if you're looking to figure out, is this a legitimate hybrid? They should be able to answer the questions, or you should be able to check those check boxes.
Yeah, and you've been instrumental in that, I believe, in sort of making sure that there's some guidelines there, there's a set of standards that ideally we're looking for hybrid publishers, and probably all publishers actually, to be adhering to, and in order to kind of levitate and rise the standard of the industry as a whole, and eliminate as many of those bad actors as possible.
I mean, I don't know that I hope that what we're able to do with the checklist is help authors eliminate the bad actors for themselves. I think there's going to be a proliferation of bad actors. And the reason is because it's an opportunity. There's all of these people writing books, and so that just happens. Like, when you have this massive swell of need, people are going to step right into that, of course. And so then you as an author have to have a tool to vet. And that is the purpose really behind that criteria. So yes, I was deeply involved with, helping to establish that, because I care about this space and I want authors not to be taken advantage of. And I think it's just important. Authors are, you're the only one as an author who knows what something is of value to you, right? I mean, so you might look at a hybrid publishing package that is $2,000 and think it's too expensive. You might look at one that is $15,000 and think it's a good deal. It depends largely on your own budget. What is it that the publisher is giving you? And there's just a whole range of possibilities out there. And then self-publishing, of course, is always a good prospect for people who are feeling shut out of the traditional space.
Yeah. So I know that, and I'm sure you get feedback on this as well. People worry that, because we certainly hear a lot, if a publisher asks you for money at all, then you walk away from them. And I just want to maybe kind of help our listeners understand that there's a difference between sort of throwing money away on a company that isn't going to give that return on you, but why has the hybrid model kind of said, okay, author, I need you to put up, have some skin in the game, basically?
Yeah, well, it's co-publishing. So I don't know where you heard that or where authors hear that. I think one of the cautionary things that you hear a lot is that agents should never ask you for money. If an agent asks for money, that usually indicates that a problem or a conflict of interest. With a publishing company, I also agree with you, they shouldn't be asking you for money. But if you are submitting and saying, I want to work with you, and your business model is one that requires finances up front, that's a very different situation, because it's an opportunity to say, hey, we're collaborating. Mm-hmm. And so it's a co-publishing venture. Some people, it's hybrid, it's, the partnership publishing. These are all synonymous terms in my mind. Mm-hmm. And so the situation, in terms of the author has skin in the game, I would say the most important piece there is that also their return is commensurate with that investment, right? So we give our authors 60% royalties on print and 70% on ebooks. And in the traditional world, you get 8.5% and 25%. So it's a huge difference in the amount of potential earn back, which obviously is important. If you're fronting the money up front, you should then stand to earn that money back on the tail end. And many of our authors do earn out. So it's just a very different business model, right? Like when you are traditionally published, ideally you get an advance. You have to earn out that advance before you ever start making royalties. And in our model, you're investing, and if you earning out your money is going to happen a lot faster, but we are hoping for you to break even. But it kind of in both places you're earning out, and so some people, of course, are going to end up in a deficit because we can't earn out every single book. But there are also not that many, business ventures that are like book publishing. It's a unique kind of thing, and there is the prospect of earning out. And I think in addition to earn out, you're looking at getting your message out into the world, getting your story out into the world. And so there are multiple compelling reasons to publish, beyond just earning out. Although for some authors, of course, that's important. And I think it can always be a goal. I always say that if you break even, you're winning.
Yeah, well, I believe that 100%. I just attended a webinar with Jane Friedman, and she was giving some very frightening statistics about how many books some people sell with the traditional space, and it's very, very low. I was really shocked at how low it can be. These might be debut novelists who are, just starting out, but it was just sobering to see some black and white figures out there. So
yeah,
I like the way that you've given us this way of just rethinking that about, earning out the advance or earning out what we've put into it, and how it's what we put in, we get out. So I hope it just helps people kind of reframe that in their minds a little bit.
Right.
I just want to say, so we've got some lovely people in our webinar live here in the room with us. So if you do have any questions, there are some coming in. If you do have any questions, please do submit them to Brooke, in case I miss something vitally important that would be of benefit to you. So Crystal is asking, should writers get their work edited before sending it to you?
You can absolutely, and we certainly encourage it. I mean, it's our preference. And if we think it needs more editing, we'll let you know. So in the 50 pages, we certainly can identify that something needs more editing, and it's part of the vetting process that we do. I think the only caveat there is that sometimes people have had their manuscripts edited quite a lot, and particularly the first 50 pages, right? And so every once in a while, something will happen where the proofreader is like, wow, the first 50 pages were really good, and then it wasn't as tight as the book went along. And so we try to mitigate that by just having really honest conversations with our authors about what the work is that needs to get done. And so we accept books that still need copy editing, and then we'll partner our authors with copy editors. So, it's helpful to me, for instance, if someone wants to submit and they think their work is in pretty good shape, but they know it needs a copy edit, that could go in the query letter. You can say, I feel like my book is in good shape, but it needs a line edit. Still, I want to submit, because we're having honest adult conversations about what the book still needs before it would get published.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, good question. Thank you, Crystal. And Ryder is asking, if someone resubmits their book to you and it still needs work, do you give them feedback on that second submission as well?
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. That's great. Yep. I've answered that, and we've answered that. Thank you. And then I think that, yes, someone was asking for the link to the TEDx, but
which Mary put in the chat. So thank you, Mary.
Cool. I will be sure to put that in the show notes as well later. Don't worry. So another question I had for you, just kind of thinking about the different models of publishing. Is there a type of writer or a type of personality that you feel is a particularly good fit for hybrid as opposed to traditional?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does need to be. What do I want to say about the personality? I mean, you are your own advocate no matter what. So I don't want to suggest that that's not true in traditional publishing. This is a more entrepreneurial model. I think it's an interesting mix, because in some ways there's a lot more hand-holding. Like I do a lot of author education, and we guide you through the process. but there's also a part of it which is, put back on the author to be a co-publisher. I mean, it's an endeavor in which we're doing it together. So I think people who like to have a little bit more creative control, who are interested in learning about the industry, I think we get a lot of self-starters, people who, and also people who have come to a point where they really know and believe that their story or their book needs to be out in the world. I find that a lot of our authors have tried the traditional route and they've experienced the rejection, but they know that the rejection is often about their author platform or, not having the je ne sais quoi quality, like whatever it is they're looking for in the book publishing world, but that's not about the book, right? So I think there is this I find that a lot of our authors have like a certain degree of independent, like indie pride, because they've been through the ringer a little bit, and then they're like, okay, I'm doing this, like I'm putting effort and money into myself. And I love working with those kinds of authors because you have sacrificed a little bit. It's not like a golden spoon kind of experience. It's really like, okay, I'm here because I want to be here. So, not every author is that way, of course, but I think those are the kinds that are drawn to us.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would, that entrepreneurial spirit that you mentioned. So people who are what I might describe as those kind of lifelong learners who want to get stuck in and they want to learn about how to share their book with people and
right.
friends, readers and things. And so what do you think then, very clear difference then between the traditional space and hybrid, but I wonder what for you is the sort of main difference then between hybrid and fully independent publishing, self-publishing?
Yeah, well, the primary difference is that when you are self-publishing, you own your ISBN, you are the publisher. I think the best self-published authors are hiring a team. And so you could hire a team of people who support you with your cover design, your interior editing. I mean, that should be the case no matter what, but you're at the center of that, kind of organizing and, figuring that out. So it's a little bit almost like being your own contractor, like, do you want to be your own contractor, and like manage the subcontractors and figure it out? Or do you want to say like, actually, that's not my expertise and I'm going to, give that job to someone else and I'm, going to be the creative, right? So that's, I think, the primary difference. Self-publishing, like I said, I hugely advocate for it. I think it's appropriate and right for some authors. It's a much faster to market kind of experience because we have the distribution that we have. We're acquiring on traditional schedules. So like right now we're acquiring for spring of 2025. That feels like a pretty far ways off for a lot of authors, and if you wanted to self-publish, you could have your book out this fall. So it's very different. The costs are less, when you self-publish, you are going to pay less. A lot of the hybrid expense does go into the distribution and the sort of mechanism of, what we do. So, and then I think the other downside, I mean, if you hire the right team, you can have a gorgeous self-published book, but the problem is that you don't know what you don't know, right? So I think that's the biggest problem with self-publishing is that there's not really a guarantee that you're not going to make mistakes because we're a publishing company. We're publishing over 100 books a year. Like, do mistakes happen like typos and things? Sure. But we're not going to publish a cover that is not up to standard. We're not going to like make silly mistakes or, newbie mistakes. And so I think those are all pieces of the picture too. And it's largely about, do you want to be the orchestrator of your own project or do you want to hire people, to collaborate with?
Yeah. As an indie author, I can definitely sort of agree that there's a lot of trial and error that goes on, a lot of mistakes that are made and tweaking along the way.
Yeah. And it's, sometimes, like you said, if you're a person who is jazzed about the idea of learning about the industry, self-publishing can be really awesome because you will learn and you will learn by mistakes. But again, like you don't necessarily want to do that if you only have one book. Like if you only have one book, I would say, you want to do that really well, or if you want to become a career author. But if you're like, oh, this is kind of fun because I want to dabble and I want to have a lot of books, and just their authors are all a different sort. And that's the other thing is like when you're out in the world, lots of times you hear, advice being mandated as if we're all the same, and it's like the genres are different. We all have different ideas about what we want. We have different personalities. And so I think that's important to take in.
Yeah, very much so. Very much so. It is interesting how the author's personality comes into play. It's not just about the publishing house or the means of publishing, but what the individual enjoys.
Yeah.
One of the things that I often see come up with, particularly with newer writers, is one of the things they get most excited about is the book cover. So if someone was to come to you to She Writes Press, do they get much of a say in that, or do you take more of the we understand the market and we think this would work, or is that collaborative as well?
It's both. I would say we definitely take the lead on it, and I think covers is one of the places where we most feel like we have to save the authors from themselves, because authors have oftentimes ideas that are not necessarily bad in the sense that the art might be good or the concept might be good, but the execution can be highly problematic, right? So we have our authors fill out cover memos because we're interested in your ideas and what do you like, and colors and comps and all this stuff. And then we take that and then we design the books. And then the covers is probably the trickiest place. I mean, sometimes it's just sails through, no problem. People love exactly what we're doing. And I do spend a fair amount of time pushing back on authors, when they want something that I know that is not right for the market. And lots of times that is like, because they're very overly invested in something too personal, like personal photographs on the cover that the composition is not good, the quality is not good. And the other place where that happens a lot is someone has an idea in their mind that they want a particular piece of artwork, but it's too busy. It doesn't leave any place for the type to shine, so we try to explain as well. It's not just like no, you're cut off. It's like, okay, well, let's look at this and why it doesn't make sense for a cover. And we're of course paying attention to the fact that it has to pop, as a little thumbnail on Amazon. There's lots of considerations. And so we try to tell our authors, to trust us. And also our goal is to deliver them something that they're going to be in love with always.
Yeah, that's been a learning curve for me, certainly, is learning the difference between a cover that I love, but then understanding what fits the genre in which I'm writing and what readers will recognize as something that they would enjoy. And the two don't always marry up 100%.
Right. Yeah. And it is a learning curve. And that's the thing. I mean, I love the authors who are curious, who will say like, oh, that's so interesting. I hadn't thought about that before. We have to fit your book into its genre, right? Like every once in a while we'll have, a memoirist who gives us all comps that are novels. And it's like, but you have a memoir, right? So it's going to have a certain flavor to it. And so sometimes authors, they haven't quite sunk into like, what is my genre? Where do I fit? Who are my, who's my cohort of like-minded authors? And so that stuff, I realize there's a huge learning curve. And I try to, have a lot of empathy for that situation while still saying like, of course, our goal is to sell books.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. And that leads me nicely on to a question from Ryder. Does She Writes Press focus on marketing, or is that more on the author's side?
Mm-hmm. It is. So it's always a little bit of a complicated answer, because the way that I characterize that is that we do what I would call all list marketing, right? We do a ton of marketing for our press, for our titles, but like, I don't take your book, Emma, and say, okay, I'm spotlighting a ton of marketing attention on Emma's book, but rather, all of the memoirs on this list are getting spotlighted onto this. We give you tons of marketing opportunities, opting into, Ingram, Amazon, lots of advertising opportunities, discounts on things, Amazon ads. I mean, you name it, there's a ton of opportunities. Not every author takes advantage of them, and we're not designing a plan for you. So those are kind of how it works. And then beyond what we do, which is significant, but again, not like dedicated to Emma, but rather to the whole list, most of our authors hire outside publicists. Some of them hire outside marketing people, but for the most part, the publicists tend to, I guess, have a little bit more merit for us and for our authors in the early days of the campaign. And then lots of people will transition to a marketing person after their publicity campaign is over.
Ah, that's really interesting. Yay. Okay, that's interesting. I'll need to work out in my own head then that difference between what's the difference between a PR person and a marketing person?
Well, a publicist is someone who you pay to try to get you unpaid media, right? So like podcasts, maybe it's a television show, maybe it's like an excerpt on LitHub. You know, they're basically trying to get you a lot of stuff that you can't pay for. You know, you have to be accepted, right? Like you can't pay me to be on my podcast, right? You pitch me. And so that's publicity. But marketing is oftentimes involving paid stuff, right? It's online strategies. It might be a campaign that's really focused around memes on social media. Where it's paid would be things like advertising, you know, Facebook ads, Amazon ads, and some of that marketing stuff is super strategic. And some of it is not expensive and some of it is ridiculously expensive. So the marketing stuff is really more around like paid opportunities, and publicity is like your publicist is trying to pitch you to get you free media.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Thanks for explaining that to us.
Yeah.
Yay. And I think it's worth just pointing out though that if people are listening and thinking, oh my goodness, that sounds scary, and having to get a PR person, in the traditional space as well, you're not guaranteed that marketing. You're not guaranteed that the publisher is going to give you a budget for marketing. That's something I hear again and again from authors is I've still got to go out and pitch myself to podcasts. I've still got to find my readers. I've not really been given much guidance on that. So it's this.
Yeah, you know, it definitely for sure depends. And I think it's one of the places that authors don't know what questions to ask, because sometimes publishers are putting quite a lot of money into marketing and publicity, and sometimes they're putting nothing, and they don't usually tell the author. It's one of the things that drove me a bit crazy about traditional publishing was the lack of transparency. Because if I were a traditionally published author and I knew that my publisher was not going to spend any money on my publicity, that would be good information for me to have, right? And so I think authors have to ask, and it often depends on the publisher, and it also depends on how you're positioned with your publisher. Because if you're, you know, someone that they're really excited about and they're going to throw some money behind, versus someone that they're kind of like, well, this person's just on our list and we don't have huge hopes for this, and so we're not going to put a lot of marketing dollars behind it, which, by the way, is an insane way to do business. But that is how traditional publishing works, you know, is like they throw a lot of money behind some books and nothing behind other books.
Really good point then. So for anybody who is thinking of going down that route, and I guess actually for any publisher you're working with, just to ask that question, what will there be any marketing budget available? How do you see yourselves promoting this? A good question. Just still on the sort of marketing side of it, the promotion side of it, Kim is asking, does the author still have to have a web page, a blog, podcasts, that kind of thing?
It's not have to, you know, I mean, you should be doing whatever it is that you want to be doing. I don't recommend that every author have a blog or every author start their own podcast. It has to be something that, what are you passionate about? How are you going to get the word out about your own, whatever, you know, story, message, ideas. And so I do think every author, like, even if you're sitting here now and you're unpublished, I think it's not too early to get a website. A website is just like basically having real estate parked online. And I think that a website today is the equivalent of a business card in the 1980s. You know, it's like so easy. You just have a business card. You don't have to have a published book. And so then when your book comes out, the website is already there for you to put more content onto. A lot of people, of course, sign with us and they don't yet have websites, and that will be something that they build while they're working on their book or finishing their book or during the publication process. Nothing is absolutely required from us on the marketing and publicity side. We certainly encourage it. You know, I don't personally think it makes sense to become a published author and have no website. because you want people to be able to find you. Some people, though, and I really completely honor this, some people have chosen to get off social media. Some people are more active or less active, and I think you can still sell books and you can still be a thriving author if social media is not your thing. But I think the more you can opt into without getting into complete overwhelm, the more opportunities you have to touch readers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I get a bit fed up with, not fed up, but I do feel a bit overwhelmed with social media and that pressure to be on every single platform and doing all the things and all the funny videos and everything. It's like, no, I don't want to do that. But mailing list, I'm a big believer in growing the mailing list, and that's where a lot of your super fans will find you and stay connected to you and ultimately want to read your books. So I'm a big advocate for that.
Yeah.
We have anonymous attendee who is asking, is She Writes Press for women writers or for everybody?
She Writes only publishes women writers and women identified writers. So we do have another imprint called SparkPress that publishes men. So if you go on to our site, shewritespress.com, you can download our catalogs, you can look at our list. But Mary was mentioning the community at She Writes Press, and I do think the fact that it's a community of women writers is the thing that really makes it special and appealing to women writers. That women writers feel supported in that space. And I come out of women-only publishing, so that was another reason that I started She Writes Press as a female press.
And writers asking, what about non-binary authors?
Yeah, we welcome non-binary. I mean, I think, like I said, that person would need to be female identified, whatever that means to you, so we're open, to interpretation, and it also kind of depends on what the book is about. We have a lot of books that have, like trans issues or related kinds of books. So yeah, I mean, it's just something we could talk about if a person was, kind of figuring out their gender identity and whether it was appropriate.
Okay. So She Writes Press has just passed the decade mark last year. So what do you think is sort of going to be going forward? Can you see what the next evolvement is or the next iteration might be of She Writes Press?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think for us, it's really about holding the line. I do think that we've established ourselves to be the gold standard in hybrid, and hybrid needs a lot of advocacy. As I wrote about in the book, in my chapter, and as you mentioned, the reason that I mention, and I'm very open to talking about the bad actors that are infiltrating this space, is because it shines a negative light on an entire model that is actually working to do great good for authors. And so I see my role as continuing to advocate for legitimate hybrids, because I think we're a really important and necessary player in the ecosystem of the publishing world. And yet, there's just a lot to get sorted out. So I hope that She Writes Press will just continue to publish good books. The wins for us will be bigger and better sales, getting a book like a New York Times bestseller, getting fabulous reviews, because those are the things that just establish us as, a publisher of merit. So it's not so much about growth or a new iteration, but rather just like a long and stable reputation of selling great books, and always stronger.
Yeah, well, I think you're already on that path. I hear nothing but good things. All the writers I ever meet who have published with She Writes Press have always said good things. So I think you're well on your way to that. We're coming up to the top of the hour. I should just say apologies to everybody. We were a bit late, which was my fault. I was having some technical issues, so I do apologize. So if you've got any last minute questions, if you're here in the Zoom room, do pop them in. But Brooke, is there anything either about hybrid publishing generally or about She Writes Press specifically that I haven't asked about, but you think would be really useful for our listeners to know about?
Well, I mentioned the hybrid criteria. I do think that's important. I don't know if Mary has the time to Google it. It's just IBPA hybrid criteria, and at least we could get the link, or you could put it in the show notes. That would be super helpful. I'm a huge fan of the Independent Book Publishers Association, and I think they're very helpful to writers everywhere. So it just might be something for folks to look into. I love to offer resources and education to authors. And you mentioned Jane Friedman. I'm sure everybody knows who she is, but her website is also a great resource. I mentioned before about doing your due diligence, make sure that you feel good about what you're entering into. I think the reason that we have a strong reputation is because I am A, very transparent, and B, I'm not trying to sell false dreams. And I do think that this is a space where authors can get a little bit blindsided by hopes and aspirations, and not that you shouldn't have that. It's completely appropriate, but there's the real business of publishing that you want to kind of get down and dirty with. And the more you know, the better you'll do. So, and then obviously buy the book, because there's a great amount of information in there, including my chapter on hybrid publishing. So
absolutely, absolutely. Sarah's just popped in with the last question, just asking, what can authors do when they have had experience with one of the bad actors? What would you
it's a really good question. I think I have mixed feelings about watchdog lists, because I think they're a little bit dangerous and they can kind of turn into witch hunts. But the organization Ally, which is for self-published authors, does have a watchdog list. So you could flag it for them. I'm working with the IBPA right now to try to be doing a certification program for legitimate hybrids. So that will be something in the future that people can turn to. And then if you are a bad actor, you will not be a certified hybrid publisher. So that will be something. But unfortunately, I think a lot of authors are getting taken advantage of, and there's not much recourse, so be careful. I also would say, no matter who you work with, get your contract vetted. The Authors Guild is a really fabulous resource, and they will tell you they actually are a kind of watchdog in a sense, because they have identified some of these bad actors. And if someone says, oh, hey, I have a contract with this publisher, if they know them to be a bad actor, they will tell the author. So they're doing important advocacy work as well. And it's not very expensive to hire the Authors Guild to vet any contract that you might get.
And well worth it by the signs of things, just in case it's a worthwhile.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, Brooke, this has been fascinating. Thank you so much for your time today. I know that you are a very busy lady, but I think this is really valuable, and it contributes towards that continual education that we all need, and just keeping abreast of what's going on in the space. So I really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and to the whole team. The book is awesome. I'm happy and honored to be a contributor. So thanks to everybody who joined today as well.
Yay. Thanks, everybody.